The 40-year-old murder that still haunts investigators. There's a detective in Pennsylvania who still keeps a file on his desk. It's not on his computer. It's not scanned into some digital system. It's an old manila folder. The kind they used back in the 1980s. The edges are worn. The paper inside has turned slightly yellow. And every few weeks, this detective, a man who has worked hundreds of cases since then, still opens that folder and reads through it again. The case inside is from 1984. A 32-year-old woman named Patricia Lang was murdered in her own home. She left behind 2 young children. The crime happened in a quiet neighborhood where things like this weren't supposed to happen. It's been more than 40 years. Most of the original detectives who worked the case have retired or passed away. The evidence has been moved between storage facilities multiple times. Witnesses have died. Memories have faded. But this one detective still can't let it go. He wasn't even the lead investigator back then. He was just a young officer when it happened. But something about this case got under his skin and never left. Over the decades, every time he had a slow week or a quiet night, he would pull out that old folder again. He's read every page more times than he can count. He knows the timeline by heart. He knows what the weather was like that night. He knows what Patricia was wearing. And he still believes he knows who did it. The problem is, after 40 years, he still can't prove it. This isn't one of those cold cases that suddenly gets solved with one magical piece of new evidence. This is the kind of case that haunts people because it almost got solved so many times. But never quite did. It's the kind of case that makes you realize how fragile justice can be, how one missed lead, one witness who stayed silent, or one piece of technology that didn't exist yet can change everything. Today on Shadow Files, we're going to look at the murder of Patricia Lang. We're going to walk through what happened in that small Pennsylvania town in 1984. Why the case went cold so quickly. And why, more than 4 decades later, it still keeps at least one investigator up at night. If you've ever wondered what it's like for detectives to carry a case with them for their entire career, this story will show you. Disclaimer. Before we go any further, I want to be clear. We tell these stories with respect for the victims and their families. We focus on the facts and the investigation. We will not sensationalize or dramatize the violence. These are real people, and we treat their stories with the seriousness they deserve. Let's go back to the beginning. It was the spring of 1984 in the small town of Millfield, Pennsylvania. Population just over 8,000 people. The kind of place where most folks left their doors unlocked during the day and knew their neighbors by name. Patricia Lang was 32 years old. She worked part-time at a local grocery store and spent the rest of her time raising her 2 children, a 7-year-old son named Tyler and a 4-year-old daughter named Emily. Patricia had been divorced for about a year. Her ex-husband lived in another state and didn't have much contact with the kids. She was doing her best to build a stable life for her children on her own. People who knew her described her as quiet, responsible, and devoted to her kids. She wasn't someone who went out much at night. Most evenings, after work, she would pick up her children from the babysitter and head straight home. On the evening of April 12, 1984, Patricia finished her shift at the grocery store around 6:30 p.m. She picked up her kids and stopped at a fast food place to get dinner. She was seen by several people that evening, the cashier at the restaurant, a neighbor who waved to her as she pulled into her driveway, and the babysitter who dropped the children off earlier that day. Everything seemed completely normal. Around 8:30 that night, Patricia put her children to bed. She later spoke briefly on the phone with a friend. That call ended around 9:15 p.m. It was the last confirmed contact anyone had with her. The next morning, Patricia didn't show up for work. Her co-workers tried calling her house. No answer. By mid-morning, one of her co-workers drove over to check on her. When she knocked on the door and got no response, she tried the handle. It was unlocked. What she found inside was devastating. Patricia had been killed in her home. The scene showed clear signs of a struggle. Her children were still asleep in their rooms, unharmed but terrified when they woke up to find police and strangers in their house. The news spread through the small town fast. People were shocked. This kind of violence didn't happen in Millfield. Not to someone like Patricia. Police immediately began a full investigation. They processed the scene carefully, collecting whatever evidence they could. Back in 1984, forensic technology was very limited compared to today. They took fingerprints, looked for signs of forced entry, and interviewed neighbors. They also spoke with Patricia's ex-husband. Though he had a solid alibi, he had been working out of state and could prove he wasn't anywhere near Pennsylvania at the time. One name kept coming up during the early interviews: Robert "Bobby" Klein. Bobby was a local handyman in his early 40s. He had done some work on Patricia's house a few months earlier, fixing a leaky faucet and helping with some minor repairs. Several neighbors remembered seeing his truck parked outside her house on more than one occasion. A few people said they had seen him talking to Patricia in her driveway. When police questioned Bobby, he admitted he knew Patricia but said he hadn't been to her house in weeks. He claimed he was home alone the night she was killed, watching television. There was no one who could confirm his alibi. Police also discovered that Bobby had a prior record, nothing violent. But he had been arrested a few years earlier for breaking into a house during a burglary. That detail made detectives pay closer attention to him. Despite their suspicions, they didn't have enough solid evidence to make an arrest. There were no eyewitnesses who saw Bobby at Patricia's house that night. The physical evidence was limited. Fingerprints found in the house didn't match him. At the time, DNA testing wasn't available for routine police work. After several weeks of investigation, the case began to stall. Leads dried up. Witnesses had nothing new to offer. The intense pressure that comes with a fresh murder case started to ease as other crimes demanded attention. By the end of 1984, Patricia Lang's murder had officially gone cold. For her two young children, life changed forever. Tyler and Emily were split up and sent to live with different relatives. They grew up without their mother and without real answers about what happened to her. Every birthday, every holiday, every milestone happened under the shadow of that unsolved case. Over the next decade, different detectives would occasionally pull the file and review it. Each time, they would re-interview anyone still alive who might know something. Each time, they would come up empty. One of those detectives was Detective Frank Rossi. He took over the case in the early 1990s. By then, Bobby Klein had moved out of Millfield and was living in another part of the state. Rossi traveled to speak with him. Bobby still denied any involvement. Without new evidence, there was nothing Rossi could do. But Rossi never forgot the case. Even after he retired in 2005, he would occasionally call the department to ask if anything new had come up. He kept in touch with Patricia's family. He told them he still believed Bobby Klein was responsible. In 2010, a new detective named Sarah Klein, no relation to Bobby, was assigned to review some of the older cold cases. She was young, tech-savvy, and determined. When she read Patricia's file, something about it bothered her. She noticed that several witnesses had mentioned seeing a truck similar to Bobby Klein's near Patricia's house around the time of the murder. But that lead had never been fully pursued. She also discovered that some of the physical evidence collected in 1984 had never been fully processed because the technology at the time wasn't advanced enough. In 2012, she sent several items to the state crime lab for modern testing. The results came back with a partial DNA profile, but it wasn't enough to identify anyone conclusively. It was frustratingly close, but not quite there. Still, The new testing gave Detective Klein hope. She kept working the case in her spare time. She re-interviewed old witnesses and tried to track down anyone who had known Bobby Klein in the 1980s. What she found was interesting. Several people who had known Bobby back then described him as having a temper, especially when he'd been drinking. One former co-worker said Bobby had once made inappropriate comments about Patricia after doing work at her house. Another person remembered Bobby complaining about money around the time of the murder and saying he might have to do something drastic. None of it was enough for an arrest, but it added to the picture detectives had been building for decades. By 2018, genetic genealogy had become a powerful new tool in cold case investigations. Detective Klein submitted the partial DNA profile to a genetic genealogy database, hoping to find relatives of the person who left the DNA. The results pointed to a family line that included Bobby Klein. It wasn't a perfect match, but it was close enough to make investigators take another hard look at him. They obtained a warrant and collected a fresh DNA sample from Bobby Klein, who was now in his late 70s and living in a nursing home. When they compared it to the evidence from 1984, it was a match. For the first time in 40 years, they had direct physical evidence linking Bobby Klein to the scene of Patricia Lang's murder. In 2021, Bobby Klein was arrested and charged with her murder. By then, he was 79 years old and in poor health. He denied the charges until the end. He passed away in 2023 while awaiting trial, taking whatever answers he had with him. For Patricia's family, the arrest brought a complicated sense of relief. After 4 decades, they finally had confirmation of what they had long suspected. But it also meant they would never get the full story or see him face justice in a courtroom. For Detective Frank Rossi, who had carried this case for most of his adult life, the news came too late. He had passed away in 2019, never knowing that the man he had always believed was responsible would finally be held accountable, at least in the eyes of the law. Detective Sarah Klein, who finally helped bring the case to a conclusion, still thinks about it often. She has said in interviews that this case taught her how important it is to never completely close the door on old investigations. Technology changes. People's willingness to talk can change. And sometimes, the truth is waiting in a box that's been sitting on a shelf for 40 years. The murder of Patricia Lang is a reminder that some cases don't just haunt the families of the victims. They can haunt the people who investigate them too, sometimes for their entire careers. When a case stays unsolved for this long, it becomes more than just a file. It becomes personal. It becomes something detectives carry with them, even after they've retired and moved on to other things. 40 years is a long time. A lot can change in 4 decades. But for the people who worked on Patricia Lang's case, some things never change. The feeling that they were close, the frustration of not having enough, and the quiet determination to keep trying, even when it seemed hopeless. That's what makes cases like this so haunting. Not just the crime itself, but the weight of all the years that passed without answers. Thank you for watching this episode of Shadow Files. These kinds of stories show us that even after decades, the truth can still matter. If this case moved you, please consider leaving a like and subscribing. It helps more than you know. Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments, as long as you keep it respectful. We'll see you in the next one. Take care.